and the scientist that I did was Sylvia Earle. Sylvia Earle was born on August 30th, 1935, in Gibblestown, New Jersey, and lived on a small farm near Camden with her parents and two brothers. Neither of Earle's parents attended college, but they instilled a love of nature in their daughter at an early age. She recalled spending hours by the pond in her backyard, filling jars with fish and tadpoles, recording her observations in notebooks. Her family moved to Dunedin, Florida when Earle was 13, and her interest turned into the Gulf Coast wildlife. An excellent student, Earle graduated high school at 16. She earned a scholarship to Florida State University, where she studied botany and graduated at 19. She also became certified as a scuba diver at this time in order to study ocean plant life firsthand. By 20, Earle earned a master's degree in botany from Duke University. Earle then began her doctoral work at Duke, focusing on algae which produce most of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere through photosynthesis. There Earle met John Taylor, a graduate student in zoology. Earle suspended her studies when the two were married. She then gave birth to a daughter and son and soon resumed her doctoral studies. In 1964, Earle was invited on a 6-week voyage to the Indian Ocean on the National Science Foundation research vessel. It was a demanding job that was not often offered to women at the time, but Earle was used to being the only woman in the scientific setting and made most of the opportunity. From 1964 to 1966, Earle joined voyages to the Galapagos Islands, the Chilean coast, and Panama Canal Zone. In 1965, she was named the resident director of the Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida. This was all on top of completing her coursework and writing her dissertation. Earle then received her PhD in botany in 1966. For her dissertation, Earle collected more than 20,000 samples of algae to catalog aquatic plants in the Gulf of New Mexico. Her project was a marvel in discipline, as she was one of the first scientists to use scuba to document marine life firsthand, and it remained a landmark study for decades. Earle continued to go on expeditions around the world. Earle and Taylor divorced, and soon Earle met Dr. Giles W. Mead, the curator of fishes at Harvard Museum of Comparative Zoology. Earle and Mead married in 1966, and Earle was appointed as a research scholar at Harvard. In February 1968, Earle joined a group of scientists in the Bahamas as part of the Smithsonian Institution's Man and Sea Project, an experimental underwater habitat. Earle descended 100 feet below the surface in a submersible vehicle and entered the habitat, the first woman scientist to do so in that manner. She was 4 months pregnant at the time. Her third child, a daughter, was born in that July. In 1969, Earle applied to the Tiktite Second Project, an innovative sponsored by the U.S. Navy, the Department of the Interior, and NASA near the U.S. Virgin Islands. Like the Man and Sea Project, it enabled scientists to live and work in a habitat 50 feet underwater. Earle and several other female scientists were immensely qualified. No one had as much diving experience as Earle, but government officials did not want men and women living together in the habitat. So in 1970, Earle led all the female team to the habitat for 2 weeks. They observed and photographed the marine life in the surrounding waters. When she and her team returned to the surface, they were celebrities. They were honored at the White House and received a parade in Chicago. Now in the spotlight, Earle became determined to share her passion for marine life with broad audiences and help the public understand the beauty and value of the oceans. Earle, Mead, and their combined 6 children moved to Los Angeles in 1970, and Earle began teaching at UCLA. She gave talks around the country describing her underwater explorations and wrote for publications like National Geographic. She also continued to go on marine expeditions around the world, often serving as their chief scientist. Earle began collaborating with undersea photographer Al Giddens. They explored a battleship graveyard in the South Pacific and followed great sperm whales in a series of expeditions featured in the documentary film Gentle Giants of the Pacific in 1980. She worked with Giddings on her 1980 book Exploring the Deep Frontier, which told of her experience walking underneath the ocean floor at the lower depth than any person before in science or since. She wore a pressurized suit and was carried to a depth of 1,250 feet, where she detached from the submersible and explored the seafloor for 2.5 hours. In the 1980s, Earle teamed up with the engineer Graham Hawkins, her third husband, after she divorced from Meade, and started 2 companies to design and build underwater vehicles that help scientists work at unpresentable depths. In 1990, Earle was appointed the chief scientist of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA, the first woman to hold the position. As the head NOAA scientist, Earle was responsible for safeguarding the health of the nation's waters. In 1992, she returned to her work in the deep ocean engineering, exploration, and education. In 1995, she published Sea Change, A Message of the Oceans, a call to action to preserve the Earth's oceans. Throughout her career, Earle has authored more than 200 publications, lectured in more than 80 countries, and led more than 100 marine expeditions, totaling over 7,000 hours underwater. She has received 27 honorary degrees and more than 100 honors from around the world, some of the most notable awards including Time Magazine's First Hero for the Planet in 1998, the United Nations Champion of Earth in 2014, and the 2009 TED Prize. Earle is the president of the chairman of the Mission Blue, an ocean advocacy group. Their most recent effort is to develop a global network of hope spots dedicated to protecting the biodiversity on which Earth's interconnected ecosystems depend, particularly in the light of accelerating threat to climate change. The documentary Mission Blue follows oceanographers Sylvia Earle's campaign to save the world's oceans from threats such as overfishing and toxic waste. Oscar-winning director James Cameron, who also filmed the Titanic, is among the experts contributing to the Netflix original documentary. Why I chose Sylvia Earle. Sylvia Earle is an important oceanographer and conversationalist who has made many significant contributions to the field of marine biology. She holds the record for the deepest walk on the seafloor and is a world-renowned expert on marine biology, and she is also the first woman to lead the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Earle advocates for the ocean conservation and education. I also loved how Earle's accomplishments have inspired many people to join the fight for a more sustainable future. She encourages people to be a force of good and become the beginning of something.